You're nothing but a whore. Alpha King Zev's voice shattered Luna Vila's world. 200 wolves watched from the throne room gallery as she knelt on cold marble, 3 days pregnant with twins she hadn't yet told him about. You dare try to trap your king with another male's bastard. His silver eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with love 72 hours ago during their secret bonding ceremony, now burned with disgust. My king, please, her voice broke. Silence, his alpha command crushed her into the floor. Behind him, his brother Darius displayed evidence, photographs, testimony, confession from warrior Jakob Frost claiming he'd bedded her. All lies, all fabricated. Zev believed every word. Strip her mark, he ordered. Vila screamed as magical fire burned the mate mark from her throat. 2 counselors held her down while nobles laughed. The bond seared with Zev's revulsion bleeding through their connection. Omega's walk, he pronounced. 1 hour head start before the hunters are released. But Alpha King Zev didn't know one thing. The bastards she carried were his true alpha heirs, Rix and Ren, and in 5 years, they'd return to claim the throne he tried to deny them. Drop a like if you've been falsely accused. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. The royal guard's grip on Vila's arms was iron as they dragged her through the palace corridors she'd once walked freely. Her throat still screamed with pain from where the court witch had burned away Zev's mark, the flesh raw and blistered, blood trickling down to stain the collar of her torn dress. 3 days pregnant. 3 days carrying the twins she discovered that morning, the secret she'd been holding close like a treasure, waiting for the perfect moment to tell him. That moment would never come now. The guards shoved her out the northern gate where the manicured palace grounds gave way to wild forest. Rogue territory. The border every wolf knew meant death for the unprotected. The senior guard, a male named Carden who'd once smiled at her in the hallways, looked at her with flat, emotionless eyes. 1 hour, he said. Then the hunters come. Run fast, Omega. They turned their backs and left her standing at the tree line, alone in the gathering dusk. No supplies, no weapons, no pack protection. Just an Omega with a burned throat and a belly that held 2 lives Zev would never know existed. Vila's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, still flat, showing no sign of the miracle growing inside. She'd wanted to tell him over breakfast, had pictured his face lighting up with joy, imagined him placing his hand over hers and whispering promises about their future. Instead, she'd stood in that throne room under alpha command, unable to speak, unable to defend herself as Darius presented his fabricated evidence and Jakob's tortured confession. The words had died in her throat, along with everything else. The mate bond writhed in her chest like a living thing in agony. It should have broken when Zev rejected her, should have snapped clean and let her go. But completed bonds didn't work that way. They could only corrupt, twist, turn poisonous. Through the connection, she felt everything. Zev's revulsion at what he believed she'd done, his disgust that she'd tried to trap him with another male's child, his satisfaction that he'd handled the situation correctly. His hatred burned through the bond like acid, and she couldn't shield against it, couldn't block out the psychic assault of her mate's loathing. 3 days ago, they'd stood in the royal gardens at midnight, just the 2 of them and the court witch who'd bound them in secret. Zev had cupped her face so gently, his silver eyes full of love. I want to court you properly first, he'd whispered against her lips. Then we'll announce to the kingdom. Let me do this right. She'd agreed, deliriously happy, drunk on the feeling of the bond snapping into place. They'd made love under the full moon, and she'd fallen asleep in his arms believing she'd found forever. 72 hours later, she was being hunted like an animal. Vila forced her legs to move. 12 miles to neutral territory. 1 hour before the hunters were released. She ran. The forest closed around her, dark and hostile. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound made her flinch. At 30 minutes, she smelled them before she saw them, feral wolves, the rogues who'd lost their humanity to madness and bloodlust. They materialized from the underbrush, 2 of them, lips pulled back over yellowed fangs. They scented the blood from her throat wound, and hunger lit their eyes. The larger one lunged. Vila dodged on pure instinct, her Omega wolf surging to the surface in terror. But she couldn't shift, not while pregnant, not without risking the bobbies. She grabbed a low-hanging branch and hauled herself up, climbing higher as the ferals circled below, snarling and snapping at air. 10 minutes they waited, hoping she'd fall. 10 minutes she clung to rough bark while her arms trembled and her throat bled. Finally, they lost interest and loped away into the darkness. Viola dropped from the tree and ran harder. At 48 minutes, the first contraction hit. She gasped and stumbled, one hand pressed to her abdomen. No, not now, not yet. But her body didn't care about timing or survival odds. Stress-induced labor, too early by months, but her body had decided it was dying and was trying to expel the pregnancy before death claimed them all. Each step became agony, each breath a battle. She ran anyway. At 59 minutes, with hunters surely mounting their horses and checking their weapons, she saw it. A cabin, small and weathered, smoke rising from its chimney. She collapsed on the porch, her fist pounding weakly against the door as another contraction tore through her. The door opened. A massive bear shifter filled the frame, all muscle and graying beard, his eyes sharp and assessing. Marcus Blackwood. She'd heard the stories, former royal guard, exiled 20 years ago for refusing to execute a pregnant Omega accused of treason. "Please," Viola gasped, her vision swimming. "I'm pregnant. The king, he sentenced me." Marcus's gaze dropped to her throat, to the burned flesh where a mate mark should be. His face went hard as stone. "History repeating itself," he muttered, scooping her up like she weighed nothing. "How far along?" 3 days. His hands moved expertly, checking her pulse, her temperature. "Can't be showing labor signs this early unless..." His expression shifted to alarm. "Twins, and they're coming now because your body thinks you're dying." Viola screamed as the next contraction ripped through her, stronger than the last. Marcus worked with the efficiency of someone who delivered pups in worse conditions, his hands steady even as Viola's world dissolved into endless waves of pain. 14 hours. 14 hours of agony as her body fought to bring life into a world that had condemned them all to death. Rix was born at sunrise, tiny and perfect, his first cry piercing the dawn. Ren followed at noon, just as small, just as miraculous. Both had silver eyes, the unmistakable mark of Stormborn bloodline. Marcus placed them in Viola's arms, these two small lives that shouldn't exist, that their father believed were bastards carried by a whore. She looked down at their perfect faces and wept, the sound raw and broken. "You were supposed to be celebrated," she whispered, her tears falling on their downy heads. "You were supposed to be princes." Marcus watched this shattered Omega cradle royal heirs their father had tried to murder before they were even born. His expression was grim, but his voice was gentle. "Maybe they still will be," he said quietly. "But first, we keep you all alive." The first year nearly killed her. Not the childbirth, not the physical recovery, but the relentless psychic assault of the corrupted mate bond. Every hour of every day, Viola felt Zev's emotions bleeding through the connection, his satisfaction at removing the problem, his relief that he'd avoided being trapped, his disgust when he thought of her. The bond transmitted it all like poison directly into her veins, and she couldn't make it stop. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, sat for hours staring at nothing while Rix and Ren cried in their cradle, and Marcus tried desperately to keep all 3 of them alive. Postpartum depression combined with psychic torture was a hell she hadn't known existed. Marcus saved her. The old bear shifter had seen this before, had watched another Omega destroyed by a corrupted bond 20 years ago. He taught Viola shielding techniques, ancient mental disciplines that could block some of the transmitted emotions. Not all, completed bonds were too strong for that, but enough. Enough that she could breathe again. Enough that she could hold her sons without feeling Zev's hatred burning through her chest. The twins thrived despite everything. Healthy, growing fast, their silver eyes watching everything with unnerving intelligence. Viola began helping Marcus treat the injured shifters who fled to neutral territory, rogues escaping pack justice, Omegas running from forced bonds, lone wolves with nowhere else to go. She discovered her healing magic was stronger than she'd ever known, amplified somehow by motherhood and survival. She could cure infections that should have been fatal, mend bones that should have stayed broken, pull shifters back from the edge of death itself. By the second year, her reputation had spread. They called her the Shadow Omega, the healer who never showed her face, who wore a silver mask and asked no questions. Refugees began seeking her out specifically. Wolves, bears, cats, even desperate rogues who'd heard the stories. She treated them all and charged nothing. Her only rule, no questions about her past. They could speculate all they wanted about the Omega with the burned throat and the twin boys with royal bloodline markers, but she never confirmed anything. The third year brought new challenges. Rix and Ren began showing alpha traits impossibly early, dominance that made adult wolves instinctively defer to them, command voices that shouldn't exist in 3-year-olds, protective instincts over their mother that bordered on feral. Marcus took over their training, teaching them combat and politics, the things they'd need to know if they ever reclaimed what was theirs. Viola told them their father was a heroic alpha who died protecting her before they were born. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, but she couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. How did you explain to 3-year-olds that their father had tried to kill them, that he'd called their mother a whore and sentenced them all to death? So she built them a fantasy instead, a dead hero they could love without complications. The fourth year brought disturbing news. Refugees whispered about King Zev, how he'd become cold, ruthless, still unmarked after all this time. How his brother Darius had consolidated power in the council. How several Omegas had been banished on flimsy evidence over the past years, their names dragged through the mud before they disappeared into rogue territory. Viola realized with sick certainty that her destruction hadn't been an isolated incident. Darius was systematically eliminating Omegas from positions of influence, and Zev either didn't notice or didn't care. By the 5th year, Rix and Ren had become extraordinary. They read at an 8-year-old level, discussed politics with Marcus like miniature philosophers, and possessed alpha command strong enough to drop full-grown wolves to their knees. Viola watched them grow stronger and knew their time in hiding was running out. Sooner or later, someone would notice 2 alpha-blooded children with silver eyes and stormborn birthmarks living in neutral territory with a masked Omega. Sooner or later, questions would be asked that she couldn't deflect. Helena Frost arrived on a cold autumn morning, her face haggard with grief and desperation. Jakob's widow, the woman whose mate had been tortured into giving false testimony, then executed to tie up loose ends. Viola had never met her, but she knew the story. Everyone in the network of displaced shifters knew it. "The king is dying," Helena said without preamble. "Plague is killing everyone with stormborn blood. Half the council is dead. They've summoned you, the Shadow Omega, as their last hope." She held out a sealed summons, the royal crest stamped in blood-red wax. "Name your price, anything." Viola stared at the summons like it was a snake. Return to the palace where she'd been destroyed. Face Zev, who still believed she'd betrayed him, who still thought his bastards had died in the forest 5 years ago. The very idea made her stomach turn. But Helena's next words changed everything. "Your sons deserve to know their father," she said quietly, her eyes knowing. "Even if he doesn't deserve them." Viola looked at Rix and Ren, playing in the corner with carved wooden wolves Marcus had made them. 5 years old. Growing up believing their father was a hero. They deserved the truth, even if the truth was ugly. "We're going," she said. Marcus objected immediately. "It could be a trap. Darius might know who you are, might know about the boys." "Then we spring the trap," Viola replied, her voice harder than it had been 5 years ago. "My sons are 5 years old. They're stormborn heirs, and their father is dying without ever knowing they exist. I won't let him die believing I betrayed him, not for his sake, for theirs. They deserve better than growing up with a lie." She packed their bags with steady hands, told Rix and Ren they were going on an important trip to help a sick king. They were ecstatic, their first time leaving the cabin, their first adventure. They didn't understand they were traveling toward the man who'd condemned them to death before they were born. Viola stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. 5 years had changed her. The scared girl who'd been banished was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, more dangerous. Her silver-white hair was longer now, her violet eyes sharper. The burn scar on her throat had healed into a permanent reminder of what had been done to her. She pulled on the silver mask that had become her identity, hiding everything but those eyes. "Ready?" Marcus asked from the doorway, his expression grim. Viola adjusted the mask one final time, her jaw set with determination. "Let's go save the male who tried to kill me." Palace gates opened for her like a mouth swallowing its prey. Viola sat rigid in the carriage, her silver mask catching the afternoon light, while Rix and Wren pressed their faces to the windows with wide-eyed wonder. They'd never seen anything like this. The towering white stone, the manicured gardens, the guards in gleaming armor. To them, it was a fairy tale come to life. To Viola, it was the place where she'd been destroyed. The grand doors, the same ones she'd been dragged through 5 years ago, bleeding and condemned, now opened wide in welcome. Council members waited to greet them, their faces respectful, even reverent. They bowed to the Shadow Omega, the legendary healer who'd agreed to help their dying king. Servants escorted them to a private wing, offering refreshments and comfort. Everything was courtesy and deference. None of them knew the masked Omega was the whore their king had banished. None of them recognized the woman they'd laughed at while she screamed. Helena Frost met them in the private suite, her face drawn with exhaustion and barely concealed desperation. She dismissed the servants with a curt gesture and waited until the door closed before speaking. "The king has 3 weeks at most. The plague targets Stormborn blood specifically. We've lost half the council already. We've tried everything, healers, witches, blood magic. Nothing works." "Show me," Viola said, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. They walked through corridors that haunted her nightmares, past the throne room where she'd knelt, past the gallery where 200 wolves had watched her humiliation. Rix and Wren walked close to her sides, their small hands occasionally reaching for hers, sensing her tension even if they didn't understand it. Marcus followed behind, his massive presence a wall of protection. Helena stopped at ornate double doors carved with the Stormborn crest. "He's been unconscious for 2 days. The fever won't break. The healers say it's only a matter of time now." Viola pushed the doors open and stopped breathing. Zev lay on the bed, barely recognizable. The powerful Alpha King who'd condemned her had been reduced to a wasting shadow. Silver veins spread across his skin like spiderwebs, pulsing with sickly light, witch-cursed blood poisoning. His chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Sweat soaked through the sheets. Fever burned in his unconscious face. Her mate, the male who destroyed her, dying. The corrupted bond flared to life, no longer transmitting hatred but pure agony. Even through her shields, even after 5 years of learning to block him out, she felt it. The curse eating him alive from the inside, his body fighting a battle it was losing. The bond had carried his disgust for so long that feeling his pain was almost shocking in its intensity. "Can you save him?" Helena's voice was quiet, but Viola heard the plea beneath it. Viola approached the bed slowly, aware of Rix and Wren watching from the doorway with curious silver eyes. They didn't know they were looking at their father. Didn't know this dying male had called them bastards and sentenced them to death before they were born. "I can try," she said. She placed her hands on Zev's chest, feeling the unnatural heat of his skin through her palms. Her healing magic rose, that Omega power she'd discovered in Exile, amplified by the mate bond that had never truly broken. It flowed from her hands into his body, seeking out the curse, wrapping around it. The curse fought back. It was old magic, dark magic, specifically designed to target and destroy Stormborn blood. It recognized her healing as an enemy and struck at her with vicious intent. Pain exploded through her body as the curse tried to infect her too, to punish her for interfering. But Viola had survived the Omega's walk, had birthed twins in a cabin while her body was shutting down, had spent 5 years feeling her mate's hatred through a corrupted bond. She was stronger than any curse. 4 hours passed. Viola poured everything she had into the healing, sweat dripping down her face beneath the mask, her muscles trembling with effort. The silver veins began to fade, retreating back toward Zev's heart as she chased them down with relentless determination. His breathing deepened, strengthened. The fever broke with an audible gasp, his body shuddering as the curse finally released its hold. "Impossible," Helena whispered, staring at Zev's now peaceful face. You did it. You actually did it. Viola tried to step back and her legs gave out. Rix was there instantly, his 5-year-old body bracing hers with surprising strength. Mama, you're bleeding, he said, his voice tight with worry. She touched her face and her fingers came away red. Her nose was bleeding from the magical strain, and she could taste copper at the back of her throat. The room spun. Marcus scooped her up like she weighed nothing, his gruff voice cutting through her dizziness. Where's the guest room? She needs rest. Now. They settled her in a room down the hall, Marcus refusing to leave her side, while Rix and Wren curled up on the bed next to her, their small hands holding hers. Viola drifted in and out of consciousness, her body demanding rest after the magical expenditure. She woke to voices in the hallway outside. Servants, speaking in hushed, excited tones. The Shadow Omega saved the king. They're saying it's a miracle. Who is she? Why does she wear that mask? I heard Counselor Darius was furious when he heard. Absolutely furious. Why would he be angry? His brother is alive. Use your head. Darius has been positioning himself as heir for months, if the king lives. The voices faded as the servants moved away. Viola's eyes snapped open, her exhaustion forgotten. Darius wanted Zev to die. This plague wasn't natural, it was engineered, targeted. An assassination attempt disguised as illness, designed to wipe out the Stormborn bloodline and leave Darius as the sole heir. She just saved the life of the male who'd condemned her, and in doing so, she'd ruined the conspiracy that had destroyed her in the first place. Beside her, Rix and Wren slept peacefully, unaware that their father lay dying just down the hall, unaware that the uncle they'd never met had orchestrated everything. Viola stared at the ceiling and wondered what she'd just set in motion. 3 days of waiting felt like 3 years. Viola kept to her guest suite with Rix and Wren, venturing out only when necessary, her mask firmly in place. Marcus stood guard like a sentinel, his bare instincts on high alert. Palace servants whispered that the king was recovering, that he'd woken and asked who had saved him. Viola said nothing, did nothing, and waited for the inevitable summons. It came on the 3rd morning. The council requested the Shadow Omega's presence in the throne room, to offer thanks, they said, to express the kingdom's gratitude. Viola stood before the mirror, adjusting her silver mask one final time. Behind her, Rix and Wren wore the simple tunics she dressed them in, short sleeves that left their left shoulders bare, where the Stormborn crescent moon birthmarks were clearly visible. She hadn't planned it, hadn't consciously decided this was the moment, but some instinct told her the time for hiding was over. The throne room doors opened, and Viola's breath caught. 5 years since she'd knelt on this marble floor screaming. 5 years since 200 wolves had watched her destruction. Now she walked in with her head high, her sons flanking her, and every eye in the room turned to watch. By the goddess, a council member whispered, loud enough to carry. Those children. Rix and Wren radiated alpha presence that shouldn't exist in 5-year-olds. Their silver eyes scanned the assembled wolves with unnerving intelligence, and their small bodies carried themselves with the confidence of royalty. They didn't cower, didn't hide. They walked like they owned the room, and watching wolves instinctively wanted to defer to them. Zev was brought in on a chair, still too weak to stand for long. He looked gaunt, pale, but alive. His silver eyes, those eyes that had once looked at her with love, then with hatred, found the masked figure in the center of the room. "You have my gratitude, Shadow Omega," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You saved my life when others had given up hope. Name your price, anything within my power to grant." Viola's voice was carefully neutral, stripped of emotion. "I require nothing, Your Majesty." "Then accept the kingdom's gratitude," Zev said. His gaze shifted to the twins standing beside her, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, confusion, a pull he couldn't quite name. "Your sons are remarkable. What pack do they hail from?" "They are mine," Viola said simply. "No pack." Darius stood beside his brother's chair, his face a mask of composed concern. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. "No pack," he said, his tone carefully light. "Then they're rogues. Forgive my curiosity, but how did rogue children develop such obvious alpha bloodline markers? The threat in his words was barely veiled. Viola felt it like a blade against her throat. He suspected something. Not the full truth, perhaps, but enough to be dangerous. Before she could respond, Rick stepped forward, his small chest puffed with indignation. His 5-year-old voice carried alpha command that made several council members flinch. "We are not rogues, we are." "Guests," Viola interrupted sharply, pulling Rick's back against her side. "We are guests who helped your king. Now we'll leave. We've overstayed our welcome." She turned, herding her sons toward the door. They'd go, disappear back into neutral territory. This had been a mistake. They should never have come. Ren sneezed. It was a child's sneeze, small, cute, the kind that would normally make adults smile. Except Ren was 5 years old with royal alpha blood running through his veins, and the sneeze released a burst of alpha pheromones so powerful it hit the room like a physical wave. Every wolf dropped to one knee involuntarily, including Zev, including Darius. The instinct was overwhelming, undeniable, submit to the superior alpha. A room full of powerful wolves on their knees before a 5-year-old child. Silence, then chaos. "Impossible," someone breathed. "A 5-year-old can't have command that's strong unless..." "Unless he's royal blood," Darius finished, his face twisting with dawning horror and rage. He looked at Viola with sudden, terrible recognition. "Who are you?" Viola's choice evaporated. There was no more running, no more hiding. She reached up with steady hands and removed her silver mask. The throne room erupted. Council members who'd witnessed her banishment 5 years ago recognized her instantly. Gasps, shouts, someone screamed. Zev stared, his face draining of every drop of color. "Viola," he whispered. The mate bond flared between them like lightning striking. He'd kept it walled off for 5 years, buried under guilt and certainty that she'd betrayed him. But her face, her presence, the truth standing in front of him, the wall shattered. Everything crashed into him at once. Her pain, her terror, her grief. 5 years of survival and suffering. 5 years of her trying to shield herself from his hatred while raising their sons alone. Zev bent forward and vomited, the psychic overload too much for his weakened body. Guards rushed forward in alarm. The throne room descended into chaos. Helena Frost stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Since we're revealing truths," she announced, holding up a tablet, "I have evidence." She gestured, and documents projected onto screens around the throne room, torture records, payment receipts, Jakob's real testimony recorded in secret before his execution. "Prince Darius fabricated every piece of evidence against Viola Ashwood. My mate died under torture, forced to confess to a crime he didn't commit. And these children," she displayed DNA results in clinical black and white, "are King Zev's biological sons, his true heirs, the twins he condemned to death before they were born." The throne room went silent as a grave. Zev's eyes moved from Viola's tear-streaked face to Rick's to Ren. His sons. The bastards he'd sentenced to death were his own alpha twin heirs. "No," he breathed, the word breaking. "No, I wouldn't." "You did," Viola said quietly. Her voice was steady, but tears streamed down her face. "You called me a whore in front of 200 wolves. You had them burn off my mate mark while I screamed. You sentenced me to the Omega's walk while I was 3 days pregnant with your children. And for 5 years, I felt your hatred through our bond every single day." Darius saw his conspiracy collapsing around him. He moved with desperate speed, pulling a silver blade from his coat. Poisoned, Viola could smell it. He lunged for Zev's weakened form. Rick's moved faster than should be possible for a child. His alpha command voice shattered windows. "Stop." Every wolf in the throne room froze. Darius hung suspended mid-lunge, his blade inches from Zev's throat, his body locked in place by command he couldn't resist. Ren joined his brother, their small hands clasped together. Their combined command created visible pressure waves that rippled through the air. "You will not hurt anyone else," Ren said, his child's voice layered with power. Guards swarmed Darius. Silver cuffs snapped around his wrists, nullifying his wolf. As they dragged him away, he screamed, spittle flying. "She's a whore. The children are bastards. I did what was necessary to protect the throne." Helena's voice cut through his screaming. "You fabricated evidence, tortured an innocent male to death, engineered a plague to kill your brother, and attempted regicide. Under ancient law, these crimes carry one sentence." "Death," Rick said. His 5-year-old voice didn't waver. "As proven heir of this kingdom, I invoke my right to demand justice for crimes against my mother and brother. Prince Darius Stormborn, you tried to kill us before we were born. The law says we choose your fate. We choose death." The throne room held its collective breath. A 5-year-old prince had just condemned a man to execution. Zev stared at his sons, his brave, terrifying, perfect sons who should never have existed. Then at Vila, who was shaking violently as 5 years of trauma and vindication collided in her chest. "Vila," he said, still on his knees. "I'm sorry, I'm so." "Don't," Vila interrupted, her voice turning to ice. "You don't get to apologize. You don't get to make this better with words. You condemned your own children to death, and they survived only because a stranger showed them more mercy than their father." She turned to the council, her spine straight despite the tremors. "I invoke ancient right of protection. As mother of proven heirs and victim of wrongful banishment, I claim sanctuary and demand council review of my case." The head counselor looked at Zev, at the twins, at the evidence still displayed on the screens. "Granted," he said quietly. "Your case will be reviewed immediately." The council convened within the hour, transforming the throne room into a court of justice. Vila sat in a simple chair facing the semicircle of council members, her sons on either side of her. Rix's small hand gripped hers tightly. Ren pressed against her other side, his face pale and confused. Behind them, Marcus stood like a mountain, silent and protective. Zev sat off to the side, relegated to observer status. Conflict of interest, the head counselor had ruled. He could not vote on the fate of his own mate and children. He looked hollowed out, his silver eyes fixed on the twins with an expression that cycled between wonder and devastation. Darius was locked in the dungeons 3 levels below, awaiting execution. His screams had echoed through the palace for the first hour before the guards had gagged him. Helena Frost presented her evidence with the precision of someone who'd been waiting 5 years for this moment. She laid out everything, the torture records showing how Jakob had been broken over 3 days of silver and wolfsbane. Payment receipts proving Darius had hired the torturers. Jakob's real testimony, recorded in secret before his execution, swearing that he'd never touched Vila, that every word of his confession had been forced. The witch who'd engineered the plague, arrested that morning, had already confessed to taking payment from Darius. The DNA results came next, displayed on massive screens for everyone to see. Rix and Ren Ashwood, biological sons of King Zev Stormborn, 99.7% certainty. Conceived during the bonding ceremony, making them legitimate heirs by every law that mattered. Marcus took the stand, his voice gruff but steady. He described finding Vila dying on his porch, delivering twin boys who should never have survived, protecting them for 5 years because he'd seen this same injustice 20 years before and refused to let history repeat itself completely. When asked why he hadn't come forward sooner, his answer was simple. "Because I was waiting for the right moment. For the moment when the truth couldn't be buried again." Medical records confirmed Vila's pregnancy timeline, 3 days along when she was banished. The twins born 14 hours after the Omega's walk began. Impossible to fake, impossible to deny. The council deliberated for 6 hours. Vila was moved to a private room with her sons, Marcus standing guard outside. The room was comfortable, plush chairs, a window overlooking the gardens, refreshments no one touched. But comfort meant nothing when your entire future hung in the balance. Rix sat quietly in his chair, his young face too serious for 5 years old. He was processing everything. The revelation that his mother had been called a whore, that the heroic dead father was actually alive and was the king, that everything he'd been told was a careful lie meant to protect him. Ren cried, huge, gulping sobs that shook his small body. Viola pulled him into her lap, rocking him gently while her own heart shattered. "Mama," Ren whispered between sobs, "why did father try to kill us?" Viola's throat tightened. How did you explain this to a 5-year-old? How did you make it make sense when it didn't make sense even to adults? "He didn't know about you," she said softly, stroking his hair. "He believed lies that said I betrayed him. He made a terrible mistake." "Does he love us now?" Rix asked, his voice small and uncertain. Viola looked at her eldest son and couldn't lie to him. "I don't know," she admitted. "But you're safe. No one can hurt you anymore, I promise you that." The council returned as the sun set, their faces grave. The throne room had filled with observers, nobles, servants, guards, anyone who could fit. Word had spread through the palace like wildfire. Everyone wanted to witness what happened to the banished whore and her bastard sons. The head counselor stood, his aged face stern. "Viola Ashwood, this council has reviewed the evidence presented. We find that you were wrongfully accused, wrongfully banished, and subjected to cruel and unjust punishment. Your banishment is hereby revoked. Your mate mark, though destroyed, will be acknowledged in all records as legitimate and completed. Your sons, Rix and Ren Stormborn, are recognized as legitimate heirs to the throne with full royal status." The throne room erupted in applause. Viola felt tears stream down her face, vindication after 5 years of being called a whore, of being told her sons were bastards. Official recognition that she'd told the truth all along. But the counselor wasn't finished. He raised his hand for silence, and something in his expression made Viola's stomach clench with dread. "However," he continued, "this council faces an unprecedented situation. Our king nearly died from a conspiracy orchestrated by his own brother. The kingdom watched half the council fall to an engineered plague. We have discovered that our judgment was corrupted, our evidence fabricated, our justice perverted. We cannot risk another succession crisis. We cannot risk placing absolute power in hands that have proven fallible." The room went silent, everyone straining to hear what came next. "Therefore," the counselor announced, his voice carrying to every corner, "this council invokes the Regent Clause, an ancient law designed for precisely these circumstances. Viola Ashwood, you are hereby appointed Queen Regent with full ruling authority until your sons reach majority at age 18. You will share the throne with King Zev, but ultimate authority rests with you until the heirs are grown. All laws, all decisions, all judgments must bear your approval. You are no longer the wronged Omega seeking justice. You are the Queen Regent, and the kingdom bows to you." Shocked silence, then pandemonium. A Queen Regent outranked a king. Viola, the whore Zev had banished, the Omega he'd sentenced to death, now had more power than him. She would rule while he served. The complete reversal of everything that had been. Zev stood slowly, still weak but forcing himself upright. Every eye turned to him, waiting for his reaction. Would he contest it, refuse, challenge the council's authority? "I accept the council's decision," he said simply. Viola stared at him, unable to process his words. "Why?" Zev met her eyes, and the mate bond between them pulsed with his sincerity and his crushing guilt. "Because I destroyed you," he said quietly. "I condemned our children. I don't deserve to rule alone. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But maybe, if I spend the rest of my life proving myself, I can earn the right to be their father." Rix and Ren watched this interaction, their young faces trying to understand the weight of what was happening. Viola stood, her spine straight, and addressed the council with a voice that didn't shake. "I accept the role of Queen Regent on one condition. I will rule, but I will not return as King Zev's mate. The bond exists, but trust is dead. He will earn his relationship with our sons. He will earn his place in this family. And if he fails, I will ensure he's removed from their lives entirely." "The council accepts your terms," the head counselor said immediately. 7 days later, Viola stood in the throne room for the 3rd time. The first time, she'd been dragged in screaming. The second time, she'd walked in masked and hidden. This time, she walked in wearing white, the color Zev had said she'd defiled, reclaimed now as her own. The coronation was witnessed by every noble family in the kingdom. Viola wore a gown of white silk that left her scarred throat visible for all to see, proof of what had been done to her, proof that she'd survived. Rix and Wren stood on either side of her, wearing crown prince circlets that caught the light. They looked like young gods, silver-eyed and powerful, and every wolf in the room felt the urge to kneel before them. Zev knelt before Viola as the head counselor placed the Queen Regent's crown on her head. He wore his king's circlet, but in this moment he was the one bowing, the one swearing loyalty and obedience. As he knelt, Viola looked down at the male who'd destroyed her. She leaned close so only he could hear her whisper. "You tried to kill us. We survived. And now I sit on the throne you denied me, protected by the sons you condemned. Remember this moment every day for the rest of your life." Zev bowed his head lower, his voice barely audible. "I will." The crown settled on Viola's head, heavy and right. The throne room erupted in cheers, and the whore became a queen. 3 months transformed the kingdom. Viola ruled with the precision of someone who'd survived the worst the system could do, and was determined no one else would suffer the same fate. Her first act as Queen Regent was to establish what the people immediately called Viola's Law. Any Omega sentenced to banishment now received automatic council review by 3 independent members. Falsifying evidence against Omegas became a capital crime, punishable by execution. The law passed unanimously. No one wanted to be seen defending the system that had nearly destroyed their queen. Medical reforms followed swiftly. Free healing services for all Omegas, regardless of pack or status. Pregnancy complications received emergency priority in every healing house across the kingdom. Viola remembered bleeding on a cabin porch while her body tried to expel the twins, remembered that no healer would have helped a banished Omega even if she'd reached one. No one else would die that way, not in her kingdom. The Justice Initiative took longer, but was perhaps most important. Every wrongful banishment case from the past decade was reviewed. 47 Omegas were exonerated and compensated. Some had survived in neutral territory like Viola. Others had died in the Omega's walk. Their families received reparations and formal apologies. The kingdom watched their Queen Regent hunt down every injustice she could find and burn it out like an infection. Helena Frost was honored in a ceremony that brought the hardened widow to tears. Jakob was officially declared a hero who died under torture rather than falsely condemn an innocent Omega. His name was cleared in every record. Helena and her daughter were given positions in the palace, Helena as advisor on Omega rights, her daughter as a lady-in-waiting to the Queen Regent. It wasn't enough to bring Jakob back, but it was justice. Finally. While Viola transformed the kingdom, Zev fought a quieter, more personal battle. His sons lived in the palace now, in a suite connected to Viola's by a shared sitting room. They were so close, and yet impossibly far away. The first week he wrote them letters. Simple things, telling them about his day, asking about theirs, sharing stories about his own childhood. Rix read every letter carefully but never responded. Wren burned the first 10 in the fireplace, one after another, his small face set with fury. Then, on the 11th day, Viola found the letter tucked under Wren's pillow instead of turned to ash. He'd started keeping them. By the 4th week, Zev gathered his courage and asked Viola if he could have dinner with the twins once a week. She'd looked at him with those cold violet eyes and said, "I'll allow it, but I stay in the room." He'd agreed immediately. The dinners were excruciating, stilted conversation, long silences, the boys calling him King Zev like he was a stranger, which he supposed he was. Week 8 brought the first breakthrough. Wren appeared in Zev's study one afternoon, shuffling his feet nervously. "Mama says you know how to play chess," he said, not meeting Zev's eyes. "Will you teach me?" Zev's throat closed up. "I'd be honored," he managed. They played for 2 hours in complete silence, Zev showing Wren how each piece moved, the basic strategies, the way the game mirrored war and politics. Wren was a quick learner, his silver eyes analyzing the board with an intelligence that made Zev's chest ache with pride and regret. When the lesson ended, Wren whispered "thank you" and fled before Zev could respond. Zev sat alone in his study and cried for the first time since the throne room revelation. Week 12 shattered something in Zev's chest and began to rebuild it as something else. He woke at 3 in the morning to screaming, high-pitched, terrified, a child's voice crying for his mother. The mate bond flared with Vila's alarm, less shielded now than it had been. She was already moving toward the twins' room. Zev ran. He didn't think, didn't question whether he had the right. His son was screaming and he ran. He burst into the twins' room to find Rix thrashing in his bed, tangled in sheets and sobbing. Vila knelt beside him, trying to wake him gently. Marcus stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the curious servants. Ren was awake, crying quietly in his own bed. "Rix, baby, wake up," Vila said, her voice breaking. "You're safe, you're safe." Rix's eyes snapped open, wild and unseeing. "The hunters, Mama, the hunters are coming, you have to run." "It's a dream," Vila said, pulling him against her. "Just a dream." "But they'll catch you, they'll hurt you." Rix was hyperventilating, his small body shaking violently. Zev moved without thinking. He knelt beside Vila, his hand hovering uncertainly over Rix's head. "May I?" he asked Vila quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and shifted so Zev could reach their son. Zev gathered Rix into his arms awkwardly, unsure how to hold a child, terrified of doing it wrong. But Rix clung to him with desperate strength, his face buried in Zev's chest. "Don't let the hunters get Mama," Rix sobbed. "Please don't let them hurt her." Something broke in Zev's chest. This was his fault. His son was having nightmares about the Omega's walk because Zev had sentenced his pregnant mate to death. Because Rix had grown up knowing his mother had been hunted like an animal. "Never," Zev promised, his voice rough. "I'll die before I let anyone hurt your mother again. I swear it on my life, on my crown, on everything I am. No one will ever hurt her. Never again." Rix's sobs gradually quieted. He didn't let go of Zev's shirt, but his breathing steadied. "Promise," he whispered. "I promise," Zev said. Vila watched them, her expression unreadable. After a long moment, she stood and went to comfort Ren, who'd stopped crying but was still wide awake and frightened. Zev held Rix until the boy fell back asleep, then carefully laid him in bed. He stayed there, sitting on the floor beside Rix's bed until morning. When he finally left, Vila was in the sitting room with tea she hadn't touched. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming." "He's my son," Zev said simply. "Of course I came." The weeks continued. Zev and Vila co-ruled with cold efficiency. She handled domestic policy, transforming the kingdom into something that protected its most vulnerable. He handled military and foreign relations, using his authority to enforce her reforms even when traditional pacts pushed back. In public, they presented a united front, the Queen Regent and her king, ruling together for the good of their heirs. In private, they barely spoke. One night, 3 months after the coronation, Zev found Vila in the gardens. The royal gardens where they'd bonded 6 years ago, where he'd promised to court her properly and do things right, where he'd destroyed everything before it could begin. She stood beneath the moon, and for a moment she looked so much like the girl she'd been that Zev's breath caught. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I need you to know I haven't stopped regretting what I did for a single moment. I see your face when you were screaming on that floor. I hear it in my nightmares, and I know I did that to you." Vila didn't turn to look at him. "You know what's worse than the mark burning?" she asked. "The Omega's walk, 5 years of corrupted bond transmitting your hatred every single day." "What?" Zev asked, dreading the answer. "That you never questioned it," Vila said quietly, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "Darius showed you evidence, and you immediately believed I'd betrayed you. You didn't ask me, didn't investigate, didn't give me a chance to speak. Your trust in me was so shallow that one conversation with your brother destroyed it completely." Zev had no defense. None, she was absolutely right. "You're right," he said. "I know I am." Vila finally looked at him, her violet eyes luminous in the moonlight. "You don't need to earn my forgiveness, Zev. You need to earn your son's trust. They're the ones who matter. They're the ones who'll decide if you deserve the title of father." She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the garden where they'd once promised forever. The mate bond pulsed between them, no longer corrupted, no longer transmitting hatred, but not love either. Just acknowledgement, just connection, Just the reality that they were bound together forever by children they'd created and a trust that had been shattered. Zev stood there until dawn, trying to figure out how to earn what he'd thrown away, trying to become someone worthy of being called father. 6 months after the coronation, Rix and Ren turned 6 years old. The council proposed a massive celebration, the first crown prince birthday in 20 years, a chance to show the kingdom their heirs, to demonstrate stability and continuity. Nobles from every territory would attend. There would be gifts, performances, a feast that would last 3 days. Vila asked her sons what they wanted. They looked at each other with that eerie twin communication, then turned to her with matching serious expressions. "We want to choose father's title," Rick said. Vila's breath caught. In wolf culture, biological relation meant nothing when it came to titles. A father had to earn the name. Children could grant or withhold it based on whether the adult had proven themselves worthy. It was one of the few powers children held absolutely, the right to name or deny the adults in their lives. For 6 months, Rix and Ren had called Zev King Zev, polite, distant, the title of a stranger who happened to rule. Zev had never pushed, had never asked them to call him anything else. He'd simply shown up every day teaching them chess, reading them stories about Stormborn history, beginning their combat training with patient hands, attending every small milestone like it was a coronation. But he'd never demanded the title he'd forfeited the moment he condemned them to death. The twins requested a private meeting. Just family, they said. Vila, Zev, and Marcus, the bear shifter they called Grandpa Bear, who'd been more of a father to them than their biological one. They gathered in Vila's private sitting room. Rix and Ren sat side by side on the couch, their silver eyes grave. Marcus stood by the window, uncomfortable with the attention. Zev sat across from his sons, his hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. Vila remained by the door, ready to intervene if this went wrong. Rick spoke first, his 6-year-old voice steady and clear. "King Zev, you tried to kill us before we were born." Zev didn't flinch from the truth. "I did," he said, meeting his son's eyes. "You hurt our mama very badly." "Yes." "Grandpa Bear saved us," Rix continued, glancing at Marcus. "He delivered us when Mama was dying. He fed us and protected us. He taught us how to fight and how to think. He was there." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his gruff face flushing. "Boys, you don't need to." "But you've been there for 6 months," Ren interrupted, looking at Zev. "You write us letters every single day. You play chess with me even though I'm terrible at it and keep making the same mistakes. You held Rix when he had nightmares about the hunters. You're trying." Tears streamed down Zev's face. He didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. "I'll try for the rest of my life," he said, his voice breaking. "I know 6 months can't make up for 5 years. I know trying can't erase what I did, but I will never stop trying." The twins looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that left everyone else feeling like outsiders. Then they both nodded and turned back to Zev. "We've decided," Rick said. "You can be our father, but Grandpa Bear gets to be Grandpa Bear because he was here first, and Mama is in charge of everything because she kept us safe when you didn't." Zev's face crumpled. "Deal," he said immediately, his voice thick. "Absolutely, whatever you want." "Also," Ren added, his tone taking on that imperious note that showed he'd been raised as a prince even in hiding, "you have to tell everyone that Mama was right and you were wrong. In public. At our birthday celebration." Zev laughed through his tears, the sound broken and joyful at once. "Done. I'll shout it from the palace walls if you want. Anything else?" Rix's face went serious in a way that made him look far older than 6. "You have to promise that if anyone ever tries to hurt Mama again, you'll protect her. No matter what evidence they show you, no matter who says she did something bad, you trust her first. Always." Zev slid from his chair to kneel on the floor before his 6-year-old sons, meeting them at eye level. "I swear on my life and my crown," he said, placing his hand over his heart. "I will always protect your mother. I will always trust her. And I will spend every day proving I deserve to be your father. If I fail even once, you can take the title back. You're in control, not me." Ren launched himself off the couch and into Zev's arms, nearly knocking him over. "Okay, you can be our dad now." Rix joined more slowly, sliding off the couch and walking over with measured steps. But then he was hugging Zev too, his small arms wrapped around his father's neck. "Dad," he whispered, testing the word. Zev held his sons and sobbed, great heaving sobs that shook his entire body, 6 months of careful control finally breaking. Marcus turned away to stare out the window, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Viola stood by the door, watching her sons choose to forgive when she couldn't, watching them give Zev something she wasn't ready to give. It was beautiful. It was painful. It was perfect. Later that evening, after the boys had gone to bed still calling Zev Dad with shy smiles, Viola found him alone in his study. He was staring at a letter Ren had written him, childish handwriting that said, "Thank you for being our dad," with a drawing of 3 stick figures labeled Dad, Rix, and Ren. "Thank you for earning it," Viola said from the doorway. "I didn't think you would." Zev looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "There were nights I wanted to give up. Nights when Ren burned my letters or Rix looked through me like I didn't exist. I thought maybe it would be kinder to just fade into the background. Let Marcus be their father in truth. But you didn't." "No," Zev set the letter down carefully like it was made of glass. "Because they're worth everything, and so are you." Viola walked into the room but kept her distance. "The bond is still there," she said quietly. "I feel you. I know you're genuine. I know the remorse is real. But Zev, I can't. Not yet, maybe not ever. You ordered my death. That doesn't go away just because you're sorry." "I know," Zev said. He didn't move toward her, didn't push. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I just hope that someday, maybe years from now, you'll believe that I would die before I made that mistake again. That I would burn this kingdom to the ground before I let anyone hurt you." Viola studied him, this male who destroyed her and was slowly, painfully rebuilding himself into someone worthy of their sons. "Prove it," she challenged. "Not to me, to every Omega in this kingdom. Make sure no one ever suffers what I did. Make my laws permanent. Enforce them even when it's politically inconvenient. Show me through action, not words." "I will," Zev promised. "Every day for the rest of my life." Viola nodded and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "They call you Dad now. Don't make them regret it." "Never," Zev said. "I'd cut out my own heart first." Viola believed him. That was the strangest part. After everything, after the screaming and the betrayal and the 5 years of hatred transmitted through a corrupted bond, she believed him. It didn't mean she forgave him. It didn't mean she'd ever be his mate again. But it meant something. It meant maybe, someday, the wound could scar instead of staying open and bleeding. 9 months into Viola's reign, the traditionalists made their move. They'd been planning it carefully, waiting for the perfect moment when symbolism could amplify their message. The twins' crown prince confirmation ceremony, where Rix and Ren would officially take oaths as heirs to the throne, was that moment. 200 wolves packed the throne room. The same number who'd witnessed Viola's humiliation 6 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Viola stood at the center of the room with her sons, reading from the ancient texts. Rix and Ren wore formal attire, their silver eyes serious as they prepared to swear their oaths. Zev stood to the side, present but not central. This was about the heirs and their regent, not the king. Marcus watched from the shadows, his bare instincts on alert even in this supposedly safe space. Viola was mid-sentence when the first attacker struck. 6 wolves burst from the crowd, silver weapons gleaming. They moved with military precision, a suicide mission planned down to the second. Palace guards engaged immediately, but the attackers had been training for this. They fought through security with brutal efficiency, their eyes locked on the twins. "For the old ways," one screamed. "Death to the Omega whore." Zev moved faster than his still-recovering body should have allowed. He threw himself in front of Ren just as a silver blade came down, taking the strike through his shoulder instead of his son's heart. He went down hard, silver poisoning already spreading from the wound. Marcus roared and shifted mid-leap, his massive bear form slamming into two attackers heading for Rix. He took 2 silver hits to the chest, his blood spattering across the marble floor, but he didn't fall. Wouldn't fall. Not while his grandson was in danger. Viola shifted in a blur of white fur, her omega wolf tiny compared to the attackers, but absolutely feral with maternal rage. She ripped out one attacker's throat before he could reach her son's, her small body moving with lethal grace. Blood sprayed. The attacker fell. But the lead assassin got through. He was larger, faster, better trained than the others. He slammed Viola's shifted form into the floor, forcing her back to human. She gasped as the air left her lungs, and then there was a silver knife at her throat. "Die, Omega whore," he snarled, pressing the blade hard enough to draw blood. "Your sons will follow." Rix and Ren stood frozen in horror for half a heartbeat. Then their voices rang out simultaneously, layered with alpha command so powerful it shook the foundations of the palace. "Release her." The assassin's hand opened involuntarily. His fingers simply stopped obeying his brain, command overriding will. The knife clattered to the marble. Zev, bleeding heavily, silver poisoning spreading up his neck, grabbed the assassin from behind and snapped his neck with a sickening crack. The body dropped. The remaining 2 attackers were swarmed by guards and subdued, silver cuffs snapping on. Silence fell over the throne room, broken only by labored breathing and the moans of the wounded. Viola scrambled to her feet and ran to Zev. He'd collapsed after killing the assassin, the silver working its way toward his heart. "You threw yourself in front of our son," she gasped, her hands already glowing with healing magic even as blood streamed from the cut on her own throat. "I promised," Zev said weakly, his face gray. "I protect the family, always." Marcus was unconscious, 2 silver blades still embedded in his chest. His massive bear form was breathing but barely. Rix and Ren stood together, holding each other, their small bodies shaking but unhurt. They'd used alpha command on instinct, saving their mother, but the power expenditure had left them pale and trembling. "Get the boys out," Viola ordered the guards. "Now, and someone help Marcus carefully, the silver is still in him." "Mama," Ren started, tears streaming. "Go," Viola said firmly. "I'll fix this, I promise." The twins were escorted out, looking back with terrified silver eyes as guards carefully lifted Marcus's unconscious form. Viola worked on Zev first. He was closer to death, the silver poisoning racing toward his heart. She poured her healing magic into him, burning through her reserves at a dangerous rate. 6 hours of continuous healing, sweat dripping down her face, her nose bleeding from the strain. The silver veins slowly retreated. His breathing stabilized. Then Marcus. Another 4 hours. The bear shifter's healing factor helped, but the silver had done terrible damage. She knit torn muscle, repaired punctured lung, pulled him back from the edge piece by agonizing piece. When she finally finished, the sun was setting. 10 hours of healing. Viola stood, tried to take a step, and her legs gave out. Zev caught her. He'd woken an hour ago but stayed quiet, letting her work on Marcus. Now he held her as she collapsed, her body finally giving up after holding on through sheer will. "I'm so tired," Viola whispered against his chest. For the first time in 6 years, she didn't push him away, didn't maintain the distance. She just broke. "I'm so tired of fighting, of surviving, of being strong. I want to stop. I want to rest." "Then let me carry some of it," Zev said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not as your mate, as your partner. Let me be the king you need me to be. Let me take some of the weight." Viola didn't answer. She just closed her eyes and fell asleep in his arms, too exhausted to maintain the walls she'd built. Too exhausted to care that she was being held by the male who'd once condemned her. Zev held her carefully, afraid to move and wake her, afraid this moment of trust, however born of exhaustion, would shatter. Palace healers worked on Marcus in the background. Guards cleaned blood off marble. Someone draped a blanket over Viola's sleeping form. "Your Majesty," a guard approached quietly, "the twins are asking for their mother." "Tell them she's resting," Zev said softly. Tell them she saved my life and Marcus's life, and now she needs to sleep. Tell them I'm watching over her." The guard bowed and left. Zev looked down at Vila, this Omega who'd survived everything he and the kingdom had thrown at her, who just spent 10 hours healing the males who'd tried to protect her family. Her face was peaceful in sleep, the constant vigilance finally gone. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her unhearing ears. "I'm so sorry for making you carry all this alone." The assassination attempt, horrific as it was, changed something fundamental in the kingdom. Word spread like wildfire. The Queen Regent had shifted and killed to protect her sons. The king had thrown himself in front of an heir, taking a silver blade that should have killed him. The bear shifter who delivered the princes had nearly died defending them, and the 5-year-old heirs had used Alpha command powerful enough to freeze a trained assassin. This family, however broken its foundation, was unified where it mattered. They bled for each other, killed for each other, would die for each other. Public opinion, which had been mixed on the Omega Queen Regent, shifted dramatically. She wasn't weak, wasn't unfit to rule. She was a mother who'd rip out throats to save her sons, a queen who'd heal enemies and allies alike until she collapsed from exhaustion. The traditionalists had tried to prove an Omega couldn't rule. Instead, they'd proven exactly why she should. The kingdom had changed beyond recognition in 5 years. Vila stood in the throne room gallery where 200 wolves had once watched her destruction, but now the space overflowed with nobles from every territory who'd come to witness her son's coronation. 10 years old. Rix and Ren had grown from frightened 5-year-olds who called their father King Zev into confident young alphas whose command presence made full-grown wolves instinctively straighten their spines. The transformation extended far beyond her sons. Omega rights were now protected by ironclad laws. Every banishment required 3 council member approval. Falsifying evidence carried capital punishment, and free education and healthcare reached every pack member regardless of status. The justice system Vila had built didn't just review cases, it actively hunted down corruption before it could take root. 47 exonerated Omegas in 5 years. Hundreds of lives changed. A kingdom rebuilt on the foundation of one Omega's refusal to die quietly. Zev had proven himself daily, not through grand gestures but through steady presence, supporting her reforms even when traditional packs pushed back, raising their sons with patience she hadn't known he possessed, attending every council meeting and deferring to her judgment without resentment. They worked together with seamless efficiency, finishing each other's sentences in strategy sessions, presenting united fronts that made their political opponents nervous. The mate bond between them had stabilized into something neither of them quite knew how to name. Not romance, not quite partnership, something that existed in the spaces between what they'd been and what they might become. But they'd never acted on it. Vila slept alone in the Queen Regent's chambers while Zev maintained his separate quarters. They co-parented with careful coordination. They ruled together but lived apart. The bond pulsed between them, patient, eternal, waiting for a decision neither was ready to make. The ceremony began at noon. Rix and Ren walked through the throne room in formal white with silver threading, the Stormborn crest embroidered across their chests. They moved with the confidence of princes who'd been raised knowing their worth, even if the world had tried to deny it. Every eye in the room tracked their progress, nodding the silver eyes, the alpha presence that made seasoned warriors want to bow. Vila stood before the twin thrones, hers and Zev's, wearing deep violet that made her eyes luminous. The burn scar on her throat was visible, a permanent reminder she'd stopped hiding years ago. She'd learned that scars could be crowns too. The crowd fell silent as she raised her hand. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner without strain. 10 years ago, I gave birth to these boys in a cabin in neutral territory, believing we'd all been sentenced to death by the male I loved. Her gaze found Zev standing to the side, and something flickered in her expression. I couldn't imagine standing here today, but survival became defiance. Defiance became strength, and strength became this. She gestured to Rix and Ren, who stood tall before their kingdom. 2 heirs who will rule this kingdom better than any who came before. Because they understand that power means nothing without mercy, that justice means nothing without truth, and that blood means nothing without choice. She lifted the first crown prince circlet, ornate silver worked with moonstones that caught the light. Rix knelt before her, his young face serious. "Rix Ashwood Stormborn," Viola said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening. "Elder heir of this kingdom, do you swear to rule with wisdom, to protect the vulnerable, and to remember that every subject deserves the justice you were denied?" "I swear it," Rix said clearly, "on my life and my honor." The circlet settled on his head perfectly, like it had been waiting 10 years for this moment. Rix stood and moved aside, his hand briefly touching his mother's in passing, a gesture so small and so full of love it made several nobles openly weep. Ren knelt next. "Ren Ashwood Stormborn, second heir of this kingdom, do you swear to serve your brother's rule, to speak truth even when it's costly, and to ensure that no child ever grows up believing their father tried to kill them?" Ren's voice didn't waver. "I swear it, with everything I am." The second circlet found its place. The crowd erupted in applause that shook the rafters, but Rix raised his hand for silence, and the room obeyed instantly, a 10-year-old commanding hundreds of adults through sheer presence. "Wait," he said, "I want to say something." Viola stepped back, giving him the floor. Rix looked at the assembled nobles, his silver eyes scanning faces until he found the ones that mattered. Marcus in his formal attire looking uncomfortable with attention, Helena Frost standing with her daughter, the council members who'd voted to make his mother Queen Regent, the common wolves who'd traveled days to witness this ceremony. "My mother is the strongest person I know," Rix said, his young voice carrying the weight of truth. "She survived what would have broken anyone else. She ruled when others doubted her. She transformed this kingdom while raising us alone." His gaze shifted to Zev. "Our father made a terrible mistake, but he spent 10 years proving he's more than his worst moment. They both taught us that you don't judge people by where they started, you judge them by where they choose to go." Ren stepped forward to stand beside his brother, their shoulders touching in that way twins did when they were unified. "So we're making a choice. Mama, you've been Queen Regent for 5 years. We want you to be queen, not regent, just queen. Forever." The throne room went silent. What the twins were asking was unprecedented, for Viola to claim full royal title independent of Zev, independent of the mate bond, based solely on her own merit. Queens became queens through marriage or birthright, not through survival, not through choice. Viola's breath caught. She looked at her sons, these brave, perfect children who'd grown up watching her fight for every inch of respect, and saw them offering her something she'd never dared to want. Then her eyes found Zev. He was watching her with an expression that held no resentment, no jealousy, no wounded pride, just acceptance, just support. He nodded, permission granted, support offered, acceptance complete. "I accept," Viola said, her voice strong. "Not because I want power, but because every Omega in this kingdom deserves to see that survival isn't the end, it's the beginning." The head counselor stepped forward immediately, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Perhaps he had been. "The council ratifies this decision," he announced. "Viola Ashwood is hereby crowned queen of this realm, not through mate bond, not through regency, but through her own merit and her heir's choice. Let no one question her authority. Let no one doubt her crown." The applause this time was deafening. Viola stood there, no longer the wronged Omega, no longer the Queen Regent ruling temporarily, but simply queen, and let herself feel it. Every hard year, every moment of survival, every time she'd chosen to keep going when dying would have been easier. The ceremony continued with traditional oaths and formal presentations, but Viola barely registered them. She was too busy watching her sons accept congratulations with grace, watching Marcus beam, with grandfatherly pride, watching Helena weep openly for the justice that had taken too long but had finally arrived. When it finally ended, and the nobles dispersed to the feast that would last 3 days, Viola slipped away to a private balcony that overlooked the gardens where she and Zev had bonded 11 years ago. She didn't hear him approach, but the mate bond warned her. Always did. You earned that crown, Zev said quietly from the doorway. Every moment of it. We earned it, Viola corrected, not turning to face him. You, me, Marcus, Helena, everyone who refused to let Darius's lies define us. Viola, his voice carried something careful, something hopeful. I know I don't deserve to ask, but someday, maybe years from now, could you consider giving us another chance, not erasing the past, just building something new on top of the ruins? Viola finally turned to look at him. 5 years of working together, 10 years since he destroyed her. The mate bond pulsed between them, patient, eternal, waiting. Ask me again in 10 more years, she said. When our sons take the throne, when you've proven that this isn't just guilt or duty, when I can trust that you see me as Viola, not as the mate you wronged. I can wait, Zev said simply. Good, Viola replied, and something that might have been a smile touched her lips. Because I waited 5 years in that cabin believing I'd die alone. You can wait 20 years to earn what you threw away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was possibility, fragile and uncertain, but real. Zev nodded and left her alone with the gardens and the moonlight and the crown that sat on her head because she'd earned it, not because any male had given it to her. Inside, she could hear her sons laughing with Marcus, their voices carrying through the open windows. Her family, her kingdom, her life that she'd built from the ashes of the worst night of her existence. The whore had become a queen. And maybe, in 20 years, she'd consider becoming a mate again. But tonight, she was enough all by herself. 20 years felt like both a lifetime and a heartbeat. Viola stood before the throne room mirrors adjusting non-existent wrinkles in her formal gown, and caught herself smiling at her own nervous energy. She was 44 years old, had ruled a kingdom for 15 years, had survived assassination attempts and political conspiracies, and yet the prospect of stepping down made her hands shake like she was 24 again and facing the unknown. You're stalling, Marcus said from the doorway, his gray beard fuller now, his massive frame slightly stooped with age but his eyes still sharp. I'm reflecting, Viola corrected. You're terrified of letting go. She laughed because he was right. 15 years of being queen, not regent, not temporary, but queen in her own right, had transformed her into something she'd never imagined. The kingdom had transformed with her. Omega rights weren't just protected anymore. They were enshrined in permanent law that would outlast any single ruler. Universal education meant Pack children learned to read regardless of their designation. The justice system she'd built didn't just review cases. It actively prevented corruption before it could take root. And the story of her survival was taught in every Pack school as a lesson about truth, justice, and the radical act of refusing to die quietly. But her sons were 20 now. Rix and Ren had grown into young men whose alpha presence commanded respect without demanding submission, whose wisdom exceeded their years because they'd been raised watching their mother rebuild a kingdom from its broken foundation. They were ready, more than ready. Which meant it was time. The throne room was packed when she entered. Every noble family, every council member, representatives from Packs across the kingdom and beyond. Rix and Ren flanked her in formal white with silver threading, moving with the unconscious synchronization of twins who'd never been separated. Zev stood to the side, always to the side now, supporting but not overshadowing, his silver eyes tracking her with an expression that held 20 years of patient devotion she still didn't quite know how to accept. Viola raised her hand, and the room fell silent. 15 years ago, she said, her voice carrying without strain, I was crowned queen to protect my children and stabilize a kingdom nearly destroyed by conspiracy. I never wanted power. I wanted justice. I wanted survival. I wanted my sons to grow up in a kingdom that valued truth over tradition. She gestured to Rix and Ren. Today, my sons are ready to rule. They understand that power means nothing without mercy, that justice requires constant vigilance, and that strength isn't about domination. It's about choosing to build rather than destroy. It's time for me to step down. The crowd erupted in protests. Voices overlapped. You can't leave us. The kingdom needs you. You're the best queen we've ever had. Several nobles were openly weeping. Viola let them express their grief and then raised her hand again. The room quieted reluctantly. "I'm not leaving," she said gently. "I'm just stepping aside. There's a difference. Your next kings don't need a mother standing behind their throne. They need the space to become the rulers this kingdom deserves." The head counselor stepped forward, his aged face solemn. "The council acknowledges Queen Viola's request to abdicate. However, we face an unprecedented situation. We have twin heirs of equal strength, equal claim, equal merit. The law doesn't account for this." Rix and Ren exchanged one of their silent twin conversations, then spoke in perfect unison. "Then change the law." Ren continued alone. "We don't want to compete for a throne, we want to share it." "Co-kings," Rix added. "An equal partnership like our parents should have had from the beginning." The council deliberated for less than 5 minutes. When they returned, the head counselor was smiling. "Unprecedented times call for unprecedented solutions. Rix and Ren Stormborn, you are hereby crowned as co-kings of this realm. May you rule together as you've lived together, unified, balanced, and stronger for your bond." The coronation that followed was unlike any in the kingdom's history. No competition, no hierarchy, just two brothers kneeling side by side while their mother placed matching crowns on their heads. When they stood, the crowd's applause shook the foundations. Viola removed her own crown slowly, reverently. She carried it to a glass case that had been prepared in the throne room's gallery, the exact spot where she'd once knelt screaming while 200 wolves watched her destruction. She placed the crown inside and sealed the case. The inscription on the bronze plaque beneath was already installed. "Worn by Viola Ashwood, who survived what should have killed her and transformed a kingdom from the ruins. May this crown remind every ruler that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the most powerful revolutions begin with one person's refusal to stay broken." That evening, Viola found herself drawn to the gardens. Their gardens, where she and Zev had bonded 21 years ago, where he'd promised to court her properly and do things right before destroying everything. The moon was full, casting silver light across the carefully tended paths. She wore a simple dress, no crown, no formal regalia, nothing to mark her as different from any other woman seeking peace under the stars. 20 years, Zev's voice came from behind her, not startling. The mate bond always warned her when he was near. "You told me to ask again in 20 years. Viola smiled slightly, not turning. "You remembered." "I've thought about it every day." He moved to sit beside her on the stone bench, carefully maintaining distance. "Viola, I don't expect you to forget what I did. I don't expect forgiveness to erase 20 years of pain. But I've spent 2 decades proving I'm not the male who destroyed you. I've watched you transform a kingdom, raise our sons to be better than I ever was, and redefine what strength means." His voice caught. "And I'm asking not as your mate, not as your king, just as Zev. Could we try?" Viola was quiet for a long moment, studying the moonlight on the garden paths. "The mate bond never broke," she finally said. "I've felt you for 20 years, every day, every moment. I know you're genuine. I know you've changed. I know you'd cut out your own heart before you made that mistake again." "But," Zev asked, because he could hear the unspoken word. "But I need you to understand, I don't need you." Viola turned to face him, her violet eyes clear and steady. "I survived without you. I thrived without you. I raised our sons, ruled a kingdom, transformed justice systems, and became someone I'm proud to be, all without you. If we do this, it's not because I need to complete the bond. It's not because I'm lonely or broken or incomplete. It's because I choose to." "I understand," Zev said quietly. "Choose me not because the bond demands it. Choose me because you want to." Viola took his hand, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him in 20 years. His skin was warm, familiar despite the decades of distance. The mate bond flared to life at the contact, singing with possibility. "Then let's start over," she said. "From the beginning, court me properly this time. No secrets, no rushing, no grand gestures that paper over the foundation. Let's see if the girl who loved you in this garden 20 years ago can find her way back to the woman I've become." Zev lifted her hand to his lips, and she felt his tears wet against her knuckles. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning you." "Good," Viola said, and her smile was real. Because I don't settle for anything less than I deserve anymore. And I deserve someone who sees me, not as the mate he wronged, not as the queen who humbled him, but as Viola. Just Viola. Then let me learn who Viola is, Zev said. Without the crown, without the title, just you. They sat in the garden until dawn, talking about small things, favorite foods, childhood memories, dreams they'd never shared. Building a foundation from honest stones instead of pretty lies. 5 years felt like both forever and an instant. Viola was 49 when they stood before the kingdom for a second bonding ceremony, but she felt 24 again, nervous and hopeful and terrified of the vulnerability that came with choosing to love someone who'd once destroyed her. She wore white again, but this time it was her choice. The dress was simple, elegant, leaving her scarred throat visible. She'd never hidden the burn scar Zev had ordered carved into her flesh, and she wouldn't start now. The scar was part of her story. Hiding it would be erasing herself. Rix and Ren walked her down the aisle, one on each side. Both were 25 now, ruling with wisdom that made her chest ache with pride. They'd transformed from frightened 5-year-olds who'd called their father a stranger into confident kings who ruled with their mother's fierce justice and their father's hard-earned patience. Marcus officiated, having been granted honorary priest status specifically for this ceremony. His massive bear form was draped in ceremonial robes that looked ridiculous and perfect. He delivered these twins in a cabin while their mother was dying, had protected them for 5 years, had earned the title, Grandpa Bear, through actions rather than blood. If anyone deserved to bind their parents together, it was him. We gather to witness something unprecedented, Marcus said, his gruff voice carrying to every corner. Not a first bonding, not a reunion, but a choice made freely after 25 years of survival, growth, and transformation. Viola Ashwood has chosen Zev Stormborn, not because fate demands it, not because a bond requires it, but because he earned the right to be chosen. Zev stepped forward, his silver eyes locked on Viola's face. When he spoke, his voice shook. I destroyed you. I broke something precious and spent 25 years trying to prove I was more than my worst moment. I don't deserve this, but I'll spend every day of forever earning it. He placed his mouth against her scarred throat, right over the burn mark his order had created, and when his canines pierced her skin to create the new mate mark, Viola felt something click into place. Not completion. She'd been complete on her own, but enhancement. The bond flaring to life fully, purely, without the corruption that had poisoned it before. Viola marked him in return, her smaller canines finding the junction of his neck and shoulder. The bond completed with a rush of emotion so powerful it drove them both to their knees. Love, regret, hope, acceptance. 25 years of pain and growth and survival crystallizing into something that transcended their broken beginning. The crowd erupted in celebration, but Viola's eyes found her son's. Rix was crying openly. Ren wore a smile that could have lit the kingdom. After the ceremony, during the feast that would last 3 days, Rix pulled his mother aside. Was he worth the wait? He asked quietly. Viola looked at Zev laughing with Marcus across the room, then at her sons, then at the kingdom she'd transformed through sheer refusal to stay broken. No, she said honestly. But I was, and that's what matters. I didn't wait for him to complete me. I waited until I was complete enough to choose him freely. That's the difference between need and want, between settling and choosing. Rix hugged her tightly. I'm glad you chose want. Me too, baby, me too. 10 years later, when Viola and Zev were in their 60s, and their grandchildren filled the palace with laughter and chaos, the throne room received one final addition. Below the plaque marking where Viola had been destroyed, a second inscription was installed. And sometimes, after 25 years and 2 coronations, the mate who destroyed you earns his way back, not because you needed him to, but because you chose to let him. That's not weakness. That's power. Viola stood before the plaques with her youngest granddaughter, a 5-year-old with Viola's violet eyes and Ren's stubborn chin. The little girl studied the words she couldn't yet read. Grandma, why did Grandpa Zev hurt you? She asked with the blunt honesty of children. Viola knelt to her level, her aged knees protesting but her heart steady. Because he believed a lie instead of trusting the truth, he made a terrible mistake. But you forgave him. No, sweetheart. Viola tucked a strand of silver-white hair behind her granddaughter's ear. I chose him again after he proved he was more than his mistake. That's different from forgiving. Some things can't be forgiven, they can only be survived and transcended. What's transcended mean? It means you climb over the broken pieces and build something new on top. You don't forget. You don't erase the scars. You just refuse to let the worst moment define your whole story. The little girl thought about this with the seriousness only children could manage. I'm glad you transcended, Grandma. Me too, baby, me too. Viola looked up at Zev, who'd been listening from across the throne room. Tears streamed down his weathered face. 25 years of earning what he'd thrown away. 25 years of proving that people could become more than their worst moments if they were willing to do the work. The mate bond hummed between them. Stable, earned, chosen. She took his hand, and they stood together before the plaques marking their destruction and rebirth. Behind them, Rix and Ren ruled with wisdom born from watching their mother transform pain into power. Around them, grandchildren played on the marble floors where Viola had once knelt screaming. Some love stories were written in the stars. Others were written in survival, second chances, and the radical act of choosing someone who'd once destroyed you, not because they deserved it, but because you deserved the choice. The whore had become a queen. The bastards had become kings. And the male who'd condemned them all had learned that earning love was harder than receiving it freely, but infinitely more valuable. Viola had survived what should have killed her, and that survival hadn't been an ending. It had been a beginning. Viola squeezed Zev's hand and looked out at the throne room, at the plaques that told her story, at her granddaughter who would grow up in a kingdom where Omegas were protected by law, at the legacy she'd built from the ashes of her worst nightmare. Tell me, she said to her granddaughter, pulling the child close, when you're old enough to understand all of this, the pain, the survival, the choice, what will you remember most? The little girl thought for a moment, her small face serious. That you didn't let them win, that you came back. Exactly, Viola whispered. I came back, and so can anyone who refuses to stay broken. She stood slowly, her aged body carrying the weight of years but her spirit as unbreakable as the day she'd birthed twins in a cabin and decided to survive. Zev helped her to her feet, their mate marks, old and new, visible on both their throats. A reminder that some wounds became decorations, some scars became crowns. Every person who survives what should destroy them writes their own version of this story, Viola said, looking directly at where palace artists were documenting the scene for the kingdom's historical records. Some take 5 years to come back, some take 25. Some are still climbing over the broken pieces right now, building something new from the ruins. Zev added quietly, and some of us spend decades earning our way back into stories we almost destroyed. That's valid too. Growth doesn't have a timeline. Their granddaughter tugged on Viola's dress. Grandma, did you ever think you wouldn't make it? Every single day for the first 5 years, Viola admitted, but I had 2 reasons to survive. She gestured to where Rix and Ren stood with their own families, her twin sons who'd been called bastards and became kings. And then those 2 reasons became 2,000 reasons, and then 2 million, every Omega who didn't have to fear wrongful banishment, every child who learned to read regardless of their designation. Every person who heard my story and decided that survival was an act of revolution. She looked at the bronze plaques one more time, reading words she'd helped compose. Then she turned to face the throne room gallery where servants, nobles, and common wolves had gathered to watch this moment. If you've survived something that should have broken you, drop a comment below and tell us where you are now, Viola said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd transformed a kingdom through sheer refusal to die quietly. Tell us if you've given someone a second chance after they destroyed you, and whether they earned it. Tell us if you're still climbing over the broken pieces right now, still building something new. Your story matters, Zev added, his silver eyes intense. Whether you're 5 years into survival or 25, whether you chose to forgive or chose to transcend without forgiving, whether you're still deciding if the person who hurt you deserves another chance. Rick stepped forward, his crown catching the light. And if our story helped you even a little, if it reminded you that bastards can become kings and whores can become queens, hit that subscribe button. Because everyone deserves to see that the worst moment doesn't have to define the whole story. Ren joined his brother. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's fighting to survive right now, someone who thinks they'll never climb over the broken pieces, someone who needs to know that coming back is possible. Viola gathered her granddaughter close. Zev's arm around her shoulders, her sons and their families surrounding her. A family built from the ruins of betrayal and destruction. A legacy written in survival and choice, and the radical act of refusing to let hate win. Thank you for witnessing our story, Viola said softly. Now go write your own. Subscribe to hear more stories of survival and transformation. Comment below with where you're watching from and whether you've ever had to choose between forgiving and transcending. We read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to know that survival is the first act of revolution, and legacy is written by those who refuse to stay broken. Your story matters. Tell us in the comments.